Okay, well, first of all, thank you so much once again for the invitation. I feel like the laptops cover me, but it's a pleasure to be here. I mean, my last TICTeC, I was trying to recall, in person was, I think it was 2018 or 17 in Florence. I participated in the online ones, but it's not the same. I mean, it's really nice to be back. So today I want to talk a little bit about what we just wrap up, the results of the second edition of the Global Data Barometer. I'm from Argentina, but the Global Data Barometer is covering 43 countries in Latin America, the Caribbean, and Africa. The first edition was a global one. In this second edition, we are focusing more on these regions in the global south, and we are aiming to provide actionable insights for people, for governments and civil society to use and to challenge the way their data ecosystems are in these days. Basically, I mean, we've been listening to different examples of how data and information is not present or is not provided by governments. Now with this, we are going to provide a general outlook of how things are in these particular countries. Basically, what we are doing today is looking at the Global Data Barometer that in 2022 with the first edition and now in 2025 with the second edition aims to provide a study of assessing national data ecosystems and the ways in which data is governed, shared, and used for the public good in general. And this is kind of the study that it was kind of this following edition of the Open Data Barometer that many of you already know, that has been running for many years, and in 2019, because of the different contexts regarding data and technology, there was kind of a consensus that we needed a new tool. So in 2020, there was conversations and the pressure started to be developed until now that we are in the second edition, that also in between first and second edition, we did a few updates and improvements to the methodology. Oops. But basically, in this first and second edition, we had collaborated with different partners around the world. In the first edition, there were many more, some of them here, because we were covering different regions around the world. In this second edition, we had regional partners that are in Latin America and the Caribbean, like ILDA and the Caribbean Open Institute, and in Africa, ALDRI, or Local Development Research Institute. They were the ones helping us in working with the researchers, gathering the data, working with them, and also doing the first round of review. But we also had thematic partners. They've been working with us, the same one from the first edition, and basically, because we are a really small core team, and of course we are not experts in every topic, so we needed expert organizations helping us in shaping the questions that we needed to ask in the different modules. So we were working with OGP, TI, Open Contracting, Land Portal, Open Ownership, and Gift, all of them collaborating in the different topics that we are covering, and we are going to talk a little bit more in a few minutes about that we are covering in the survey. Basically, this is some of the numbers, just to put a few graphics there. Some of the numbers in this second edition. We are talking about 2 years. I mean, we've done that in the first edition, covering from 2019 to 2021. In this second edition, we are covering 2022, August 2022 to September 2024. So that's something to be considered, because many things, like for example, Martin was talking about the INAI in Mexico and what is happening right now is not covered in this edition. So the things or the repercussions by those decisions are not covered in these results, because we are gathering data until September 2024, for example. We have 6 thematic partners, the same ones that I mentioned before, regional hubs, 43 countries covered. We have 27 primary indicators. Those are the ones that we gather data from. We have also 12 secondary indicators from other sources that we trusted and that we use to put our data in context for 422 primary variables, more than 30,000 data points. So those are some of the numbers around this second edition of the barometer. Once again, this is the coverage that we have in this year: Latin America, almost all of the countries, and the Caribbean, and 21 countries in Africa. So basically, some clarifications about the barometer. Basically, one of the things that we always mention, and we know rankings sell, but we don't want to focus on that. The idea is that the barometer is a rating more than a ranking. So we have a scoring scale from 0 to 100 based on best practices aligned with international agreed norms and frameworks. And the idea is that each country can measure themselves and look at the gaps and improvement that they do, instead of just measuring with who is the number one, the number two, or the last in the ranking. Because in a way, we are measuring different contexts, so it's not really fair to put the focus in the scale of 1 to whatever, in this case 43, even though we all want to know who is first and who is last. I mean, we already know, but we try to avoid that approach. All aspects of the methodology are open in our website. I mean, at the last slide, I'm going to provide the link, but if you don't know, globaldatabarometer.org, and in the first edition and in this one, we put an open data tab, where we put all the information there, not only the notes and the handbooks about methodology, scoring, and so on, but we put all the answers provided by the researchers. So whoever wants to calculate it or do their own math or do their own analysis is there, and we also encourage you to do it because we want it to be used. I mean, we put a lot of energy, time, and resources into this, and we want not only governments but also academic journalists and civil society to use it. Basically, I mean, as I was mentioning a little bit before, we cover 2 years from the end of August 2022 to September 2024. We work with an expert survey that it was developed, as mentioned before, with the collaboration of the thematic partners. Also, we gather information from the first round, from researchers, from coordinators, from thematic partners about the things that were working and the things that didn't. So learning from that, we adapt and adopt many of the things that we were listening from our partners and researchers and coordinators. And basically, we are covering 3 main pillars, or three main areas. That is governance in the more traditional sense or basic sense, that is talking about legislation, regulations, policies, and guidelines. Capabilities in the sense that authorities, agents, teams, budgets, skills, training, infrastructure to make data available, and availability, or the way that we can find the data open. We are looking at different thematic areas, and we are also looking into the elements, the way that data is made available. Here, basically, is the structure. Probably the font there is a little bit small, but it's just to give you an idea about what we are implementing when we do the data collection. Basically, the structure of the indicator, that is the main question, with sub-questions and supporting questions, and a group of indicators are included in action areas, and then they are grouped in clusters. There in the other side, you can see about the topics that are covered in each of them. Clusters, there are some of the core ones that we are talking about, governance foundations and competencies, that talks about, let's say, all the frameworks around the availability of data, for example, data protection. We are talking about data sharing, data management. We are talking about also in critical competencies about the infrastructure, the literacy, and the reuse. There we cover the open data policy and initiatives. And then we have the thematic ones that cover different topics that are important for accountability purposes. For example, political integrity, that's the module that we developed together with OGP and TI that covers different topics or different action areas, let's say, like political finance, lobbying, interest and asset declarations, right to access information performance. I have to clarify there that we are looking at the data from the performance of the implementation of those legislations, and also political integrity, interoperability, that is not interoperability frameworks as a whole, but looking at the interoperability between the data sets in the political integrity area. Land management that we do in collaboration with Land Portal, land tenure and land use, and here I had to make a clarification. Land Portal is developing their own index focusing on land data. So in this edition, they gather the data for those indicators. I mean, we provided indicators, they took it, they make it deeper into just land data, and they collected the data for us in those two indicators in the countries that we are covering in this edition. So we are learning from each other. We developed indicators in the first edition. They now are developing a new index on land data, but in return, they are gathering the data for those indicators for us. Next, company information that we develop with open ownership, looking at beneficial ownership at companies and company register. Procurement, public finance, looking at budget and spending, and equitable access that we use more as a cross-cutting issue. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, looking mostly at accessibility and language. And as I was mentioning before, here are the cross-cutting issues, because we understand that we have so many data points and not all topics can be understood by looking at the indicators or the action areas only. So we look at some of the topics throughout the whole survey through different elements, and some of the things that we are looking at are data foundation for AI. We put different questions in different areas about AI use or AI provisions, inclusion in terms of people with disabilities and different languages, and the use of data. In the first edition, something that we learned is that it was almost impossible to put a number on the indicators that we were implementing on use, because we were comparing the way that different countries documented their use instead of the use per se. So instead of that, because we were reflecting on the way we were capturing different issues, we are putting different questions for examples of use more than putting a score on the use as an indicator for methodology purposes. So we are gathering the information, but we are not putting a score or a number into it because it was not correct in the methodologically sense. So I was mentioning before the core areas of analysis that basically are governance foundations and critical competencies. In the first one, governance foundations, we include fundamental components that support responsible data ecosystems, such as data protection that I've been mentioning before, and I keep mentioning because I think it's a key basic element for any data ecosystem, data management frameworks as well, and data sharing. And also in terms of critical competencies, we focus on skills and practices required to make data available in an effective way. So some summary of the findings, we had so many more and so many on a country level, regional level, so this is gonna be just a quick summary, but happy to talk about any other findings or also looking in depth in conversations if you are interested in any particular area. So basically, when we were talking about the governance foundations, we have, for example, that data protection laws have expanded significantly. Oh, 5 minutes, and I say I was going to be short. Expanding significantly, in particular in Africa, is progressing in terms of this particular period of time, and in Latin America, they are moving closer to universal adoption. The difference is that because of the year that these different regulations are enacted, what we found is in Africa, we have in some regulations mentions to AI-specific considerations that we couldn't find in some of the legislations in Latin America because they've been enacted a long time ago or a few years ago. Also, when we are talking about data management and sharing, what we can say is that data management in general, what we found is has improved with notable increases in quality control processes, user feedback mechanisms, and metadata standards. We also see that, for example, in Latin America, Brazil and Chile are indicating a strong digital governance, and in Africa, there's still some disparities in the region. In terms of data sharing, what we can say is there's still a lack of specific references to AI requirements, which are critical for the use of data for AI purposes, or the use of data, let's say, nowadays. And in many cases, something that we've found as well is that African regulations often include restrictions on data brokers, reflecting different priorities in terms of regulations. I'm going to try to go a little bit quicker. In terms of capabilities and digital government, what we can see is that in Latin America and the Caribbean, countries generally have a stronger foundation infrastructure than in Africa. In many cases, we are seeing that there's a stronger presence of government bodies responsible for data governance, as well as higher levels of internet access in these regions more than in Africa. And in terms of digital government, we are seeing that in different Latin American countries, like Brazil, for example, demonstrate advanced capabilities, while many other nations still face challenging in integrating digital platforms for public service and data dissemination. Something that is a little bit concerning is about data literacy. There are structured training programs for public officials, but there's still a lack of consistent or well-funded efforts to build data literacy within the public sector. And we can see that later. I mean, in many cases, there are mentions to AI training, but there are just a few, and in many cases, there are for senior officials only. In terms of data reuse, around 63% of countries have open data initiatives of the ones that we are covering, but only 46% are government-led because some of them are supported by other international organizations. So this means that it's difficult to sustain. And in many cases, government support for the open data reuse is uneven as well. In some countries, we can see some hackathons and other activities to support the reuse of their data by other members, like, for example, academia or civil society. But in many others, we see a very limited government involvement in this support. In terms of, we have, I'm going to go moving through the thematic analysis. We are seeing different findings in the different areas. In many cases, we see gaps in political integrity data. There's we see many information related to public finance and procurement, but for example, lobby and interoperability between different data sets in the political integrity field is lacking and is kind of an urgent need to be covered. In terms of beneficial ownership, again, is another area that is especially weak. And also land tenure and use needs some work also there. We also have, as I mentioned before, some ideas about data foundation for AI. There you can see what I was mentioning before about training for, in particular for senior officials, and those are, just to clarify, those 42% is about the data that is already, the data that we have of programs that are already in place. So it's not about all the countries, but the countries that already has some process in place or some program in place. We talk about inclusion in terms, in particular, about accessibility for people with disability, and also we talk about language barriers. In many cases, they are significant. And just to finish, again, we can go through this in detail if you want. Happy to provide them and to talk about them. But in general sense, just to finish, we can say that in general, data governance frameworks are lagging in implementation. In many cases, they are good on paper, but implementation is lacking. Data skills and competencies are essential, and they prove to be key in terms of having quality data. AI readiness remains fragmented and underdeveloped. Open data is at a crossroads, so we need to put effort and resources there if we want it to succeed, or at least to be sustained. Gaps in transparency undermines accountability goals. That's easy to see. Inclusion in data governance is largely symbolic. There are many things in paper that we don't see later in the implementation. Lack of interoperability in terms of the political integrity data sets. In many cases in Latin America and the Caribbean, the results indicate a strong institutional capacity but limited cross-agency coordination. And for Africa, what we can see in a general sense is that there's significant progress but ongoing challenges with implementation. So in general, there are an ongoing need for joint efforts to strengthen data ecosystem globally, in particular in the regions that we are covering. So we have data that is not only available, but is high quality and that can be used for the public good in general sense. Once again, thank you for your time. I know it's been a rush. There is the link, blue, I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's pretty easy, globaldatabarometer.org. There is my mail if you want to talk about more of the things that we have here. And thank you once again for the invitation.